Well, good morning and happy holidays, everybody. Welcome to the Albany Pine Bush Preserve Commission's quarterly board meeting. My name is Keith Gertz. I'm the Regional Director for DEC's Region 4, and I also serve as the board chair. Now I'll go around the room and introduce the Executive Director and the rest of the board members. To my right, representing the City of Albany, is Chris Spencer. To my left is Executive Director Chris Hauver. Going on the tables, Mike McLaughlin, representing Albany County. And then there's Elaine Chinian-Ball, representing the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. Next is Harvey Alexander, Citizen Rep, followed by Steve Rice and Nancy Pearson, also Citizen Reps. Representing the town of Colonies, Mike Lyons. Representing the town of Gilliland is Peter Barber. And then the last citizen rep, John Bruss. Last but not least, of course.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. So the first order of business is to consider the minutes from the last board meeting. Can I have a motion?
I'll make that.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Now we will open the floor to the public. If there's anybody from the public that would like to make some comments, now is the time. Anybody? Okay. Okay, now to reports. The only thing I'd like to report is we have a new supervisor for natural resources. That's Jeff Ryder. Jeff is the person over there in the blue shirt. He replaces Pete Ennis. If you all remember Pete Ennis, he's moved on to bigger and better things, allegedly. But we're happy to have Jeff here. Jeff's from Region 3. He was a forester in Region 3 for many, many years. So now I will go around and see if there's any board members who have any things they'd like to report. Nothing? Okay. So the floor is yours, Chris.
Okay, thanks, Keith. Happy winter solstice today, first day of winter, shortest day of the year. That means starting tomorrow they get longer.
Thank God.
Speaking of winter solstice, we have our winter solstice hike tonight. That's at, is it 6:30, am I right? Jackie? No.
I can't remember, sorry.
I think it's 6:30 to 8. It's a little under 1 mile loop. We come back and have cocoa around a campfire. So if you're interested, I'll give you the exact time.
It's after dark.
It's after dark. It's definitely after dark. We've got a number of things going on for school break week, for winter break between Christmas and New Year's. You can take a look at that on the program guide that's out when you leave in the Discovery Center. One of the more interesting things is this year we're trying something new. We have a person coming in to teach kids how to make their own film, and then they'll actually show their film later in the year. So that's kind of neat. Other things going on. You're familiar, obviously, with the Lupin Fest that we do every year, big public outreach event for the community that brings in 2,000 plus people. One of the smaller things that we do every year is Smoky Bear Day. We've done that for a number of years. That's usually a 200 to 400 person event. That's always on Columbus Day, and that focuses on fire safety. So we tried something new. The education staff came up with, and communication staff came up with a thing called Night at the Discovery Center, which is themed on Night at the Museum, where everything comes to life. So the whole thing was a lot of fun. We had 220 people, Aaron?
Yeah,
it was like 220.
Yeah.
But it was really nice, a lot of families. Harvey was there with a friend and his wife dressed up in period clothing to make sure that so Harvey came to life. Period clothing, so he came to life, and we had other folks like, we had a person in Nomex coming to life. It was a lot of fun, so I just wanted to say thanks to everybody who put that on, and Harvey for helping participate. We had a good time. What else is new? This was the 10th year for fall migration bird banding, first decade, which was pretty exciting. Fire management. We did our first burn in December, ever. So December 8th, even though we had a little bit of snow, we let that melt off and burned The last burn of the year, total, Tyler, we're at what, about 195 acres for the year?
Yep.
Which is really good. So congratulations for that. We had it was in the paper for that last burn twice. TU picked it up twice, so that was nice coverage. Probably because we were burning in December. Other things going on, we're doing a lot of work on trails. The stewardship department's doing a lot of work on trails. Jesse and Joel, we got 12 new kiosks up. They're fantastic looking. If you're interested, if you walk out the back door to look at the one for going into Carter Barons, the one's up. That was a joint project with stewardship and the science committee and our graphic designer, Alice Burnett. They're pretty cool. And there's two new ones. There's a new trailhead on Kings Road called the Truax Barons. And then there's another kiosk that's new, moved from a different trailhead on Rapp Road. It's called the Rapp Barons. And that's the area that was completely cleared for habitat work. Remember on Rapp Road, you go between Central, Washington Avenue Extension across from the landfill. That's all been cleared. There's a new trail, and thanks to Delaware Engineering for working with our staff to help finalize the plans for that bridge. We got the bridge in before everything froze. Bridge looks great. And then one final thing, I just wanted to mention briefly that Mike Lyons, who represents the town of Colony and has been a partner here for a long time, as long as I've been here, almost 25 years, is retiring very soon. I don't think we'll see the last of him, hopefully not. Mike comes to a lot of our programs. And since I just found out last week that he was retiring, officially, I knew he was going to. That was too short a notice to put something together for recognition for this. So hopefully you'll come back for the March meeting, Mike.
I certainly will.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
And that's it. Finally, the annual report is finished. This is the final version. We gave you a draft one. Wendy Craney always puts this together working with information from the staff. We gave you the draft in September. This is the final version, so you have it. If you want extra copies for anybody, we're happy to print them for you. Let me know. I know you want some for class. Yep. I'll write that down right now. That's it. Questions? Great, thanks.
The new kiosks really do look good, Chris.
Don't they? Are they fantastic?
Well, the one off Washington Avenue Extension is really recognizable.
Oh, yeah, from the road.
Quite a distance.
Yep.
Okay, next we're going to hear from Neil Gifford with his technical committee project review.
So, morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Proceeding here, I'll only go
I like it.
Good morning.
Project review remains slow, so the committee actually has not needed to meet over this last quarter. You'll notice a couple of changes. One, there are no active projects the committee is reviewing from the town of Guilderland. There are a couple in Albany and a couple in Colony that we continue to monitor and keep track of. But the one I wanted to highlight is the city's continued work with their habitat restoration related to the most recent expansion of the landfill. Bottom line, that continues to go very well, the restoration around the landfill itself. And that big report up there, if anybody's interested, is their annual monitoring plan. So this thing they give us every year, and it highlights all of their monitoring from throughout the project, everything from hydrology, insects, birds, plants, you name it. Bottom line, the habitat restoration work is going really well. In particular, they're doing a lot of good work in managing and continuing to manage invasive species. But the map that I gave you all highlights where they've planted lupin. They have about 40 acres of lupin so far around the landfill. And the reason I wanted to show you that today is that they've been picking up carnaroo butterflies and frosted elfin butterflies, the two rare species, in just about all of those sites. In particular, in addition, in the test plots they established up on the landfill itself, had quite a few carnaroos this year and frosted elfin. So all of that is suggesting that not only is it working, but when they're successful in restoring the cat landfill itself, that should be able to provide some habitat. And related to that, the one piece of the restoration plan that has not yet been approved by DEC is the actual closure plan, so the Part 360 closure plan to the landfill. And I talked to Solid Waste earlier this week, and conceptually they agree with it. They're just working through the details, the engineering details. But it looks like that's going to be approved. It's a significant modification of what they typically do with a Part 360 closure, in that we're putting all of that sand and sandy loam on top of the landfill in addition to the conventional clay and 6 inches of topsoil. So they're really crunching the numbers given the slopes up there to make sure everything's going to work. All indications are that it will be approved at some point in the future.
Are the butterflies getting there on their own, or are you helping?
Yeah, no, we only released them that 1 year, I think in 2011, 2012. And they had found their way out there by themselves, so we just boosted the numbers a little bit, and they've now spread in pretty much every place they plan to poop in. As you can see from that map, it's kind of scattered across their habitat restoration project around the landfill, which links really well with the work that Stewardship has done on the east side of Brentwood. Do you have a question, Steve?
Yeah, that northwest,
Yep.
corner, is that fully capped now?
It's capped and closed, yes, but
Okay,
not with
with the
a
sand.
conventional cap, not with the sand.
Okay,
So where you see the yellow square
Yeah,
there?
that's right.
Those are the test plots where they established looking at various depths of sand and different pH of sand.
Okay.
And they landscaped they planted all of that. with
Because it
native-
looks like it's native vegetation now.
Yeah, it's
It's-
pretty weedy, Phragmites and colties and grasses.
Oh, it
and then-
is, okay.
And then the patch that they restore where they put the sand has, looks like pitchpine scribble barrens.
Okay, good.
Yep.
And I don't know if this is a question for you or someone else. Does anybody know the status of Albany's consideration of what they're going to do next with the landfill?
I mean, the one thing I can tell you is, well, you probably should say the same thing. You'll see in the budget how mitigation has dropped considerably. It's because they're slowing the intake down quite a bit, even to the point where their operating hours are now only 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. So the original thought was that the landfill was going to go to 2021. I would expect at that rate it may go further, but there's still nothing.
Right, solid waste suggested probably 2030.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're really stretching out the life of the landfill by reducing their tipping rates every day. It's hard to anticipate what they might do a year or two from now, but just everything looks like it. They're trying to stretch the life out.
What about the commercial enterprises that they have? Are they shutting those down?
I'm not aware of that. I mean, I believe you're talking about commercial waste?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe they're still accepting
still
commercial
taking it.
waste. Yeah.
It just, with the shorter operating hours, it's reduced it dramatically. So a lot of those commercial haulers are looking at Colony or Western New York, Seneca Meadows.
Where do we stand with respect to the issue of slope stabilization and, eventually the full cap?
So that's the closure plan. They think they have a plan figured out. It'll be phased in over time, small pieces at a time, so they can manage erosion. And in particular, that's what DEC is really scrutinizing heavily, is making sure that what they're doing there is not going to jeopardize slope stability. But all indications are, it's like what they propose is going to work. It's not pure sand anymore. It's a mix of sand and loam with a high sand content,
Yeah.
which will give the native plants a competitive advantage.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, next is Lisa Anthony with the financial report.
Good morning. Happy holidays, everybody.
Good morning.
Our first report is a statement of financial activities. This goes through the first 7 months of our fiscal year and through October 31st. So on the revenue side, dues and contributions are slightly over budget. This is just due to an increase in donations through October. Government grant income is directly related to our expenses and is slightly under budget, but this should even out over our fiscal year. Mitigation fees are 127% of budget, and this is just based on an increase in tonnage from the landfill of 86,000 and 66,000 versus our budget of 60,000 a quarter. Lease revenue is on budget for the year. Other revenue is $7,000 higher than budget, and this is due to an increase in merchandise sales. Total revenue came in at 94% of budget through the month of October. Moving on to expenses, personnel and under budget, and this is due to a large benefit payment that was made in November, which will will catch up our personnel and fringe line, and that was for our retirement system. Travel and training is under budget due to the timing of budget and actual expenses, and some seminars that we were unable to attend, but we do have a training in January and February, so it will catch up a little bit. Contractual is 87% of budget, and this is due to our federal grant, which is our wildland risk reduction grant. And this was spent in November and December. Communications is $54,000 under budget due to the timing of kiosks and signage that Chris mentioned earlier, and production and fabrication, and this was spent in November as well. Occupancy, which is utilities and repairs, is under budget, and this usually catches up in the winter months when utilities are higher. And supplies and equipment are under budget in all departments at 57%. And this will catch up the last quarter. And we have a lot of big purchases that we still have to buy. Computers and equipment, PPE equipment, and conference phones and projectors. So other expenses came in slightly under budget due to marketing and promotion. And this is also due to timing, which will include pole banners and a brochure service. Overall, both revenue expenses came in under budget at 94% and 81%, giving us a higher net income for October of $313,000. Any questions on that? Moving on to statement of net assets. Cash decreased due to an increase in spending and a transfer of excess cash into our reserves. Conservation and land reserves remain the same. Grants receivables increased due to money owed from DC, and this has been paid. Accounts receivable increased due to money owed from foundation, and this has been paid. Inventory decreased slightly, and this was just due to a physical inventory that we took in September. Prepaid expenses are zero, and this is due to the timing of expenditures that fall into our next fiscal year. This will show up on our March income statement and balance sheet. Investments increased $521,000, and this is due to a positive performance in all three funds of $221,000 and a transfer of funds into this account of $300,000 into the reserve account. Capital assets increased due to septic work at the Barron's house and exhibit work that we're doing here at the Discovery Center. Deferred outflows remain the same, and this is the reporting requirement from GASB for the retirement system, which is an actuarial report. This will change at the end of November, and the net effect of that was about $30,000 on the balance sheet and liabilities, which we'll see in our January report. Total assets increased $491,000, and this is due to an increase in receivables and investments. On the liability side, accounts payable and accrued expenses decreased slightly, $43,000 due to realized rent that occurred last year and payment of bonds for tree removal. Deferred revenue remained the same. New York State pension liability remained the same, and again, this is a function of GASB 68. This will change in our January report for New York State retirement. Total liabilities decreased $43,000 over the last year due to realized rent and repayment of bonds. On net assets, capital assets increased as of the above due to septic work and Discovery Center exhibit work. Reserved assets remained unchanged, and unreserved assets increased $491,000, giving an increased assets of $534,000, which is a positive NOI of $313,000 and an increase in investments of $221,000. Any questions on that? To investments, which has been a fantastic year. All three funds are positive. The reserve fund came in at 0.73% increase. Annualized rate for Discovery Center endowment was 6.93, and the endowment at 6.79%, giving us an increase in investments of $221,000. And November is coming in very high as well. Looks like there's another $46,000 in increased investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, so we're going to move into the action items. Did you want to talk any more about the annual plan, or we're just going to?
Yeah, I'll go through them briefly.
Okay.
I'll go through all the,
All of them at once? Or-
no, I'll do the annual plan, the budget, and then the policies and procedures. So, starting with action item A, so this is the annual plan for 2018-19 fiscal year that starts April 1st of 18. Those of you who've been here for a while, you're familiar with this. The annual plan looks very similar to it does year by year. We modify it somewhat. If there's specific things that we've accomplished, very discrete things, we remove them. Other things that are discrete, we add them. Other things that stay the same, such as fire management, communications, science work. So there's not a lot that changed, but you have both. So you have the track changes so you can see what's changed, what's new and what's been removed, and then there's the clean copy. So there's nothing really substantive, so I wasn't going to go through them, and I assume that you've looked at them. So, does anybody have any questions on the annual plan? No.
Okay, so can I have a motion to accept the annual plan? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So action item B is the budget, which supports the annual plan. And I'll go through that in a little more detail for you. So this is based on an appropriation of $2.675 million from the Environmental Protection Fund. That's what the appropriation was or is for this current fiscal year. So we're going on that assumption that when the executive comes out with his budget later in January, that number will stay the same. So that's what we base this budget on. But I'll run down, if you look at the categories and go over some of the highlights, what's new, what's changed. So what variances? So this current fiscal year, the EPF was 2.717, so that's the 2.675 plus rollover money from last year that didn't get spent, so that's why it's higher. So there was money that didn't get spent for projects like some stewardship work, some stuff at the Discovery Center from 16-17, that's why it's 2.717. That makes sense. There's also $150,000 federal grant money for wildland urban interface, basically hazard reduction for fire management. That's in this current fiscal year, that's not in this new budget, so that's a decrease. However, we have applied for that money again, so my hope is that we're going to have to revise this budget in March because we'll have gotten that grant, but we don't have it yet. And then there's another decrease you'll see in the mitigation fees. So mitigation fees from the landfill currently budgeted at $240,000. This fiscal year we're budgeting at $200,000, continuing to drop. Just for comparison, in 16-17, if you look at that budget, it was $380 budgeted. It's been as high as $500, so it's dropping, which is it's okay. I mean, we're still getting a lot of work done. You know, that's been very helpful, but the EPF has gone up as well. So overall, we're down about $226,000 income. Where are we up? Salaries and benefits, that went up about, where am I? I can tell you what it went up by. 6% overall increase for merit and step increases if the governor approves them. And one of the big jumps, there's a 4% increase in our benefit rate. That's a lot to do with health insurance, so it went from 47% to 51%. And then there's another $19,000 that we added for seasonals. So one of the things that we're doing is we're boosting seasonal staff by $1 per hour. And that's primarily incentive to have people not live in our house because we get a lot of seasonals and having a lot of, Audrey's looking at me right here. Audrey was a seasonal. Audrey's from she was a St. Rose student under our internship. There's a lot of people in a house, so if we can give incentive, an extra $1 per hour, perhaps they would find an apartment and not live in the house and provide. It's a lot of people, so we may or may not spend that money.
I think that would work with offspring and children too.
No. I'll give you $1 an hour extra for your allowance if you don't live at home, if you don't eat. So where have we also go? So in expensive, we've gone down in contractual. We did a lot of work this year. You've seen a lot of work on the ground. There's a lot of habitat work. Those of you who have spoken to people that may have been less than happy about the clearing, you know there's been a lot of habitat work through tree clearing and other work. So there's less of that going on. The grant from the federal government is gone. There's a number of projects that we're not working this year that aren't there. Other things that's reduced, the kiosks are done. We bought a lot of equipment this year, and we've done a fair amount of signage work like the pole banners. So overall, the budget's down by revenue by $226,000 and expenses are down by $224,000. So it's pretty much a wash. So the budget for this leaves an operating cash flow surplus of $4,600. It's a lot of information, but hopefully that's a decent sum. You have specific questions? Help answer.
Okay. So, have a motion to consider the 2018-19 operating budget.
Make a motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. So on the back of, actually you shouldn't have passed that, we have to go backwards, sorry. There's a 5-year budget that goes along with this budget that we have to submit for Paris as part of our reporting as a public authority. And it has to be submitted by January 1st, along with this budget that you just passed. So on the back side, draft that we put together that we work on, based on what we know or what we would expect to get from the state of New York for the EPF, what we expect benefits might be, or salaries and benefits may be, and what overall expenses may be. And that includes the reduction of the landfill mitigation. So that's the 5-year summary that goes along, that's built on this budget as well. Now can we have a motion? Sorry.
I'll make
Got
a
ahead.
motion again.
Mike?
Second.
Second. Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Action item C, policies and procedures. I'm sure you read these with a fine-tooth comb, all 50-plus pages. So what prompted this, if you remember in June, we modified the policies and procedures at the September board meeting. Or was it the June meeting? Either way, we modified them because there were some inconsistencies on what full and part-time actually was for a variable work schedule. So we modified that. This time, what prompted this change is the paid family leave requirement from New York State. We have to do that because management confidential employees are doing that under the governor. So we're following that based on our bylaws. So we needed language in these P&Ps that reflect that. So I figured it was time. We're going to go with it. We're going to talk to a human resources attorney. So we did that. If we're doing it, please go through the whole document. So it looks like there's a lot of changes. Nothing's really substantive. It's cleaned up a lot. The language is up to date. He and his staff made sure that everything is accurate based on the laws of today. We got rid of a lot of things that could change in the future, putting in actually the websites, the URLs, so you can just click on those. But the substantive change to this is the addition of paid family leave. And you can answer any other questions that you might be interested in.
Chris, I'd like to make a suggestion.
Okay?
As you said, or as you suggested, I certainly haven't gone through this. I like being informed about it,
Yep.
but I would suggest that we don't need to be approving it. Because much of this is just compliance with existing laws. We have no option but to approve it. And this has been developed by the attorneys you went to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to disagree with anything.
No, that's what we pay them to do.
Exactly. So I like being informed about it, knowing that you're doing all of this. But the approval suggests that we've gone through this in detail, and we agree with all these changes. I'll go along with whatever anybody wants to do, but I certainly haven't done that. So, just a suggestion.
I mean, you're right, like paid family leave, there is no, we have to do paid family leave. And we have to have it in the policies and procedures manual. So that's one thing. I guess, and the other thing is policies and procedures are for the employees. And the employees are the responsibility of my position, my role. I mean, it's been a formality that I always put them in front of you. It's kind of like when there's salary increases, I report on them. We used to actually approve them, and we got to the point where there's no approval. We have to, if we've adopted and we have approved the bylaws recognize that we follow the management confidential schedule. If there's a change in management confidential employees' salary or otherwise or benefits, we have to follow that unless we change the bylaws. So I report to you. I mean, I can do the same thing with the policies and procedures. If we make changes, I can report, and and then provide them to you if you want to see them, what those changes are.
We, as a group, we approve the management plan, but I do read that, and we've talked about it at every board meeting. I trust that Harvey's gone through it in detail. I look at him, and if he's there going, yes, okay, I know we're good to go.
Well, I think John's point is that, again, if I sat there and said there's something I don't like in here, we could not approve it or we could change it. Okay, so I can see voting on that. I agree with John. I don't see that here, though. If we sat there and said we approve, what's going to happen?
Nothing. You can't not approve.
Well, that's why. That's why I don't. You know, to me, if we're voting on something, that says if we don't want it, we can change it somehow.
Right. You're taking action, and when you're taking an action, you're approving something or disproving something.
Right. So I don't see this as an action item. I agree with John. It's not an action item because we can't do an action on it.
Can I, just to play this devil's advocate for a bit, certainly the paid family leave portion
Right.
is not something we can vote against.
Nope.
But are there other pieces of the policies and procedure plan that are discretionary? That's
Yeah.
the question, and if it is, and even if it is, since it is essentially your job to put that together, and, do we need to approve those or just be informed of those? I'm just kind of curious as to how the board feels about that.
Well, how about this? If there's something that I would think would be substantive, so substantive that maybe the board would want to look at it, I could confer with the chair, and then you'd go to the governance committee. Because the governance committee is like this, and they take it to the governance committee, and the governance committee could then, I mean, I'm not sure what it would be at this point. Not much would change in these from this point on. Yeah, it's
That
easy for me
works
to
for
say.
me. If it's substantive, then there's a process for that. But I don't like approving something I haven't read.
Right.
And that some of these issues are not issues that I'm informed of. Even if I haven't read it, I'm not an informed decision maker.
Well, that's why we paid an HR attorney and their staff to write it, because Lisa and I weren't going to write it.
Yeah, exactly.
So, have we approved this in earlier versions?
Yes.
Okay, so in effect, we're looking at the changes and approving those.
You have it.
We would have said, oh, we're fine with this. I picked one, whistleblower policy. I've seen that. I mean,
Yep.
you know, so maybe going forward, then it is looking at what's being added that's discretionary to look at, that says, oh, now we're changing, because in effect, we have approved it once, and now we're going to keep tweaking it. But I mean, this is a major one, you said, because you did have an attorney look at it and kind of clean it up and make sure it's good for right now.
You know, now in the days of electronic age, what we could do is, instead of making a resolution, an action item, it can be included in the board packet. And it can be, when there's changes, I can reference it. So you have you can see everything is tracked.
And ask us if we have any comments.
If you have any comments.
Yep.
And if you disagree,
Then we'll speak up.
yeah, but then you'll have it even before the board meeting, so we could have a conversation prior to that. Does that make sense? So then you have it. It's not even, I'm not just reporting on it. You have it prior to a meeting, quarterly,
Yep,
and then I report on it.
yep.
Makes more sense.
Okay.
That sounds good.
So there is no action on this.
Take a vote on that?
I don't think you have to. If you've got it, Rick, that's pretty well reflected in the minutes, right?
Will be.
Rick never gets enough thanks for taking minutes. He takes really good.
Yes, thank you, Rick.
He does, they're really good. He probably wishes he didn't take good minutes. Okay. So that's what we'll do, that's what we'll do going forward.
Can I ask a question on one of the things, a couple of things that have been removed?
Sure.
And again, I don't know if these are
Sure.
details you have, it's, in the human resources section, and removing the section on compliance, immigration law compliance, removing the section on affirmative action. I don't know if they've removed just because they're not required, or if there's been some change in law that,
Because he didn't feel that they're appropriate to have in the policies and procedures because they're a given. You have to do that.
aren't there a lot of things in this document that you have to do and follow?
Yeah, but some of the things like in paid family leave, it's very specific to us. What would be an example? For paid family leave for us, staff can use paid time off. So they could use, right, sick,
Increments of 1 day.
yeah, sick, personal, or vacation. Not all paid family leaves, like for example, maybe Delaware Engineering, you have to do paid family leave. You might not provide that. We do that because staff have, as getting benefits through the state of New York, they get quite a bit of time. So why not provide that option? So that's why we get into that level of detail. Affirmative action you have to follow. It's part of the labor law.
So that's where.
It's not a
these
good
other-
answer, but
That's where some of these other items that you're required to do wind up showing up.
yeah,
It's either through the New York State labor law.
yeah.
Or, I'm not sure what other.
In affirmative action, you have to follow it.
And Chris, we have all the postings for those legal requirements. If we get a new posting, if anything is updated, they're posted in the kitchen. That's one of the labor law posting requirements, as well as the paid family leave. So we have to list our policies, our policy holders, affirmative action. There are posters that cover one wall that actually notify employees of their rights. And if they change, we receive new posters from our company that we contract out. That's in the kitchen as well, for public view. So it's constantly, if something is changing, we update the posters, and then the links the attorney put in for the things that change, like the retirement system. The overtime rates may change, the percentages may change for tier 6. So depends on your salary and that. So that changes every year. Sometimes there are updates to FMLA, so that might change every year. So that's where we inserted the links for the forever changing. So we didn't have to constantly bring them to the little nuances that change.
That's a whole section that he had that's considerably redone, FMLA, just because it's new language. That's Family and Medical Leave Act, if you're not familiar with it. And FMLA is in there, but that's regardless. I'll leave that alone. Did you have other questions about it?
No, I
No?
just was curious.
I mean, that's a good question. Other things that he took out are like appropriate staff behavior, like you don't swear.
Saw that.
I mean, that's kind of a given. Or like you be courteous, like you don't like, I mean, it's a given. It's like appropriate workplace behavior. You don't yell.
But if it's not in there and something like that happens and becomes a problem for you, does that tie your hands in terms of acting on it?
No, because, no.
Because we do training as well. We do harassment training, sexual harassment training, workplace training.
What's the drawback of it being in
Training how to
there?
harass?
Is there more?
The attorney made the point that it's part of, like, it's recognized by the Department of Labor in appropriate workplace behavior. So like, if somebody's yelling all the time, and you if somebody's yelling all the time, or they're behaving in a way that's not appropriate, and I speak to them, the person who's like in charge of all employees, and they don't comply, and I repeatedly do that, and they don't comply, that's not a good thing. I mean,
The other side of that is we listed a few. There are many.
yeah,
appropriate
right.
Okay.
behaviors.
Right.
So we listed a few.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Are you held to those few
Right.
and everything else is acceptable?
Well, and it's like
Okay.
fighting was in there, like you can't hit someone. That's, but you laugh. But it's like there's other things like you can't hit somebody, but things like you can't flick them in the nose. You can't do that either. So it's. I know it sounds.
Can you
funny.
do that at Delaware Engineering?
You can. Private sector. Private sector.
And our list is top secret. It's fully discretionary. It's like the captain's rules.
Yes.
Only the captain knows the rules.
Right.
Exactly.
The captain is right, and I'm the captain.
Exactly. The captain is always right.
Captain is always right. Yes. Other questions?
I assume this is on your internal website?
It's
or-
internal. It's in our
So-
share. Yep.
Okay, so I need to keep my paper copy. Well, I guess it's in my email.
It's in your email.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And if you want a copy, I can.
No, this is fine. I just need to, and not that I can think of when I'd want to.
briefly in a little bit. So the other question may be, why are we putting these on prairie warblers as opposed to other species? For starters, prairie warblers are declining in North America, and here in New York State they're a species of greatest conservation need. And so to prevent the further decline in the species, we need to understand more about its ecology. And migration is a particularly big part of this animal's ecology. And prairie warblers are also really closely tied to the vegetation conditions of inland pitch pine scrub oak barrens. And as I'm sure you are aware, we're putting a lot of effort here into restoring and maintaining pitch pine scrub oak barrens here in the pine bush. But we want to know, is our management efforts working? Because prairie warblers are tied so closely to this vegetation type, if the prairie warblers are doing well, then our management is probably being successful. So we already have some evidence already that we're succeeding here. Based on our point count information, we know that abundances of prairie warblers are consistently high. There was a color banding study that Neil did a few years back now where we color banded individuals and we followed them over time and we got year-to-year survival. And our banding data, and particularly our map stations that we run, are also showing that prairie warblers are successfully breeding in most years. So during the breeding season here in the pine bush, they seem to be doing pretty well. So that's all what's happening during the breeding season. That doesn't, if the birds can't make it to the overwintering grounds and can't get back to here, it really doesn't matter what we're doing on the breeding grounds if they can't make it to their wintering grounds and back. So we're interested in how their activities in the non-breeding season tie into the breeding season activities that we can witness here. And some of the, I think, the most basic yet important pieces of information we can get during the non-breeding season is where do they go and how do they get there? Okay, so that's a little bit of background about about why we're doing this study. So now let's just jump right in and talk about the study objectives. Our first objective was look at the effects of the geolocators on the birds. So first we wanted to in particular we wanted to look at what are the physical effects of the geolocators on the birds? And we also wanted to look at how are the geolocators affecting return rates, territory fidelity, and arrival times. Our second objective is to look, where do these guys go during migration? Where do they overwinter, and what route do they take there to get there and back? And the third objective was to look at carryover effects. And by carryover effects, I mean we want to know, how does winter habitat quality affect when they leave the winter habitat? How does that winter habitat quality affect their migration back to the breeding grounds? And then in turn, how does that affect that migration affect their success here in the breeding grounds? So obviously that will be a lot to cover during this time that I have. So right now I'm only going to focus on just this second objective. Basically, where do they go and how do they get there? So as I mentioned previously, we're conducting this study at 2 sites. One is obviously the Albany Pine Bush Preserve, the other is Montague Plains Wildlife Management Area. That's just north of Springfield, Massachusetts. Most of the results I show you are for the Pine Bush, but I do have some results from Mike's work at Montague that I will include where I have those. And I both these locations trying to provoke variants. So we're dealing with pretty similar habitat types in each of these locations. Okay, we conducted the study in 2016 and 2017. I'll start with 2016 and talk about the geolocator and harness design. This is what the geolocators look like. They're not very big. They're 19.5 by 6 by 3 millimeters, and they're less than 1/2 gram. And they collect light level information every 2 minutes. And their battery, they're supposed to last about a year. And this here is a sensor that records the light level information. These metal things are where I hook it up to the computer so I can get the data off. The harness was made out of a 1/2 millimeter black stretchy jewelry cord that was tied into a figure 8 design with 14.5 millimeter loops. I just used an insect pinning board to help hold measure the loops and hold the knot in place. And then I would put a drop of super glue on the knot and attach it to the underside of the geolocator. And this is what the final product looked like. And then finally, before we were going out into the field with the geolocators, we'd have to activate the geolocator. So that means we basically took it out of sleep mode, it's in sleep mode to help conserve the battery. We'd take it out of sleep mode, and in doing that, we'd have to initialize the clock to the current time. Okay, in 2016, we systematically worked across the study site to locate singing males. When we found a singing male, we would put up a mist net near where the male was singing. This is the mist net. And then we would also do an audio playback was an audio playback of a singing male, and we'd also use a decoy. And with any luck, when we'd set up the net, play the audio playback with the decoy, and with any luck, the birds would come in to investigate who the heck was in their territory. They'd fly right into the net, and with any luck, we'd catch them pretty quick. When we captured the birds, we marked them with a USGS aluminum band, and then we also marked them with a unique combination of 3 color bands. We determined the age and sex of the birds, and then we measured mass and wing chord. Now we attached geolocators to all the birds that we caught that were over 8 grams. And I should mention that 8 gram cutoff, that was a weight cutoff recommendation by the USGS who authorized this research. They wanted to ensure that the weight of the geolocator was a small percentage of the bird's body weight as possible. So there's a 1/2 gram transmitter on an 8 gram bird that was just, the percentage was just about over 6% of the bird's body weight. So in terms of getting the geolocators on, remember there's sort of that figure 8 harness, we would slip one leg up, one loop over the leg, put the position the geolocator on the back of the bird, making sure that the sensor was obviously facing upwards. We put the loop down the other side. We slip the other leg through the other loop, and then we would work the loops up to the base of the leg, make sure that the geolocator was resting snugly on the lower back of the bird. And then we would take a plastic strip here and we would tuck the feathers underneath the geolocator. And then hopefully we would wind up with something that looks like this. Okay, so that's what we did in 2016 and 2017. So we put the geolocators on 2016. They took off south. They came back. In 2017, then we had to find the birds that returned and we had to catch them. So we had to relocate the birds. We target netted those birds again, capture them. We measured the mass, tail length, and wing chord, and we obtained obviously the geolocator. That was our precious cargo. We made sure we got that off the bird first if we captured a bird with a geolocator. And then when we were done in the field for the day, I'd come in and I'd download the data off of the geolocator. Okay, so I'll just start just with some very general results, basically about how many birds we were dealing with and what happened to them. In 2016, we captured a total of 56 birds in the pine bush. 25 of those we put geolocators on, and 31 of those just had color bands and no geolocators. Of those 25 birds, 12 of those returned. 25 birds with geolocators, 12 of those returned. 13 they didn't return, or if they did return, we weren't able to find them. Of the 12 that returned, 11 of them had their geolocator on. One of them gave the geolocator the slip. I don't know how. You little suckers. Of the 11 birds with geolocators, 10 of those we were able to capture, and one of those we just could not get back in the net, which killed us to leave that geolocator still sitting out there, but we tried days and days and days, and that bird was having none of it. And then of those 10 geolocators we got back, I was able to download the full year's worth of data off of 8. 2 of those I couldn't get the data off of. I sent them back to the manufacturer to see if they could get the data off. They couldn't. I think they said the geolocators failed for whatever reason after 16 days. So we couldn't get data off of those. So we have 8 geolocators out of the 25 that we put on. Of our 31 birds with no geolocators, just for comparison, about 2/3 of those returned and 10 of those didn't return.
It's not looking good.
Now in Montague, Mike had 87 birds out there, 22 of which had geolocators. And of those 22, he had 9 of those returned. All 9 of those were carrying the geolocators. He was able to get all 9, and then of those 9 geolocators he was able to get data off of 6. 3 of those couldn't get the data off, also sent those back to the manufacturer, and he got partial data off of 3 of those geolocators. Of the 65 birds with no geolocators, a little more than half of those returned, and a little less than half didn't return. Okay, so as I mentioned before, now I'm just going to move to just right into the second objective and talk about where did these birds go. And so let's start by looking at the raw data from the geolocators. So in the pine bush, the geolocators were deployed for an average of 325 days. In Montague, they were deployed for an average of 343 days. And remember, these things were recording light information every 2 minutes. They were taking a light reading. So that was about 250,000 light level readings per geolocator. And here's just what 2,000 of those readings look like. So this is about 3 days worth of observations. And really, this is the ideal pattern. What we're looking for here, this is, again, in the geolocator, these are just light levels over time, as all the geolocators are recording. But this is really the ideal pattern here. So what we see is like a very sharp increase from really low light conditions to maximal light conditions. That corresponds with sunrise. Then we maintain it at maximal light level conditions throughout the day. And then at sunset, we see a sharp decline to minimal light level conditions, and those are sustained overnight. So we're looking for these ideally we're looking for these very clean twilight events, sunrise and sunset. Now that's the ideal pattern. Sometimes we're dealing with this less than ideal pattern. So what's going on here? We have a lot of downward spikes during the day. Anybody have any ideas what's happening here?
Into dark areas.
Yeah, shading. So these probably likely represent when the bird is under vegetation, or maybe its wings cover the sensor, or maybe there's clouds going over. So these downward spikes are actually shading events. And these can be particularly troublesome when they're occurring right around sunrise and sunset times, because it can make it look like sunrise is coming later in the day than it is, and sunset might be coming a little bit earlier. So these are issues that we're dealing with these data. So we use those data to determine sunrise and sunset times, and we do this using a very simple method called the threshold method. And so twilight times are identified as the time points when light intensity passes a specific threshold. Here we're using 2.5 as our threshold, which is shown here by the blue dashed line. And so when it goes from darkness and then increases past the threshold, that marks the sunset or sunrise time, which is here by the solid yellow line. And then when it crosses this threshold on the way back down, that represents sunset, which is the dashed yellow line. And so it does those for each of these twilight events. So here's just a figure showing conceptually how this works, how we go from these twilight events to latitude, and how we can go use that information also to get longitude. So here is a flattened map of the Earth during the northern hemisphere's winter. So this boundary here represents the sunrise, the transition between darkness and light, and then this here represents sunset. And so for example, suppose you have a point here in the US, Earth rotates towards the east, so the sunrise is here. This point then moves with the Earth as it rotates, and then it hits over here, and it's the sun sets. This time that it spends illuminated, that's day length, and that gives us a latitude because you can see how day length changes latitude. During the in the Arctic, and then as you go south, day length increases to 12 hours of the equator, and then 24 hours in the Antarctic. And so the day length then can be tied to latitude. So in terms of longitude, you get longitude by knowing if we know the sunrise time here and the sunset time here. You can find the time of solar noon, and you can see what meridian or what longitude line that corresponds with, which gives you the longitude position as well. So there's standard astronomical equations that are used for converting these twilight events to latitude and solar noon, midnight to longitude. This here is just an example of how this graph shows the equations that are used to translate day length into latitude. And so, for example, if we take, say, at Julian day 180, suppose our geolocator tells us the day length is about 14 hours long, that's going to put us at about 30 degrees latitude north. A couple things I want you to notice here. What if we look at the equinox, the spring and the fall equinoxes? That occurs here at about Julian day 80 and about Julian day 265. What do we know about the bird's position during the equinox?
Tell us.
Almost nothing. Actually nothing. Like it's 12 hours. It's 12 hours of daylight all over the globe. So the day length tells us nothing about where that bird is during the equinox because it's 12 hours of daylight everywhere. And then also these things, the geolocators aren't going to work where there's 24 hours of night and 24 hours of daylight because we won't be able to figure out sunset or sunrise time. So we'll know that they're either in the Antarctic or Arctic, but beyond that, we're not going to really be able to have any idea what latitude they're at without sunrise and sunset. So and the way I dealt with this equinox is because around the equinox you couldn't tell where the birds were. I actually dropped 20 days on either side of the equinox, the spring and the equinox and the fall equinox, because basically the positions are useless. The estimated positions are useless during that time. Okay, so on this graph, this is just to let you down easy. There's three different colors here. There's only put 3 birds on this map so it wouldn't get too busy. These are the locations of birds during the first of these 3 birds during the first 3 weeks after we put the geolocators on. So these guys were on territory in the Albany pine bush. So all these points should probably be hidden under this red X. But clearly they're not. So they're not. These things aren't particularly precise, and they're also not particularly accurate. At least I should say at the scale that we're interested in. On a global scale, this would look great. If we were looking at the globe, we'd be like, look at that. They're right here, right around here. But on the scale that we're interested in, this is a little bit less precise than we were hoping for. And I think we knew when we started using this technology that it wasn't going to be a super precise. This wasn't going to be like GPS level precision. But I think we were hoping for something a little bit better than this. But this is what we have. Here we can look at this in a little more quantitative fashion. So these are the 8 birds that we got data from the pine bush. These are their distribution of distances for each of the birds. So each bird was over 100 kilometers away on average. Its locations were from the pine bush during that 3-week period. And if we average across all the birds, it was about 177 kilometers on average is how far these birds were on average from the pine bush during that 3-week period. So just to give you some context, 177 kilometers away would be like Burlington to the north and like White Plains to the south. So that's kind of the noise that we're dealing with in these data. So this really isn't great, but let's not lose sight of what we're doing here. We're strapping a half-gram light sensor on 8-gram bird, and we're sending to the tropics and back. And so the fact that we're getting any location information at all, I think, is still pretty impressive. Okay, so now that I eased you into the disappointment about the precision of these things, hopefully you'll not be quite as bummed as I was when I first looked at the map of these birds. So this is 3 birds across their northern and southern migration. So these are just the positional data. This just shows you where the geolocators told us where the birds were. So clearly there's a lot of noise here, but I think there's still some interesting stuff we can get out of this. First of all, I mean, I think we knew Prairie Warblers as a species, we knew they overwintered somewhere down in the Caribbean. Now we know from where actually our birds overwinter. You can see the concentration of points here are over Haiti and the Dominican Republic, is where our birds ended up. And then Montague, here's 3 birds from Montague, and we can see that the 3 birds from Montague are also winding up in the same places as well. So our birds are probably, they're very likely probably mixing on the wintering grounds. So here are some other interesting things we've learned. So here I have a series of maps showing the birds' movements during migration. So we'll flip through these maps, starting with this bird was captured here on June 18th of 2016. This is where it was pretty much from the end of June and through July. This is where the bird was during August. This is where it was for the first 2 days of September. Then we lost 40 days due to the fall equinox. We picked the bird up here again around mid-October, heading down the coast towards Florida, off the tip of Florida, across Cuba, and then ultimately overwintering the Dominican Republic, where it was from about Halloween up until May 1st. And so fortunately, it spent the spring equinox here, so we didn't lose any information during the migration during the spring equinox. Then after May, the bird started to move north again, up the coast, back to the pine bush where we recaptured that bird on May 18th. So this bird took about 2 months to come down the coast, but only about 2 weeks to go back up during the spring migration. Now here's another one, and notice what this bird does, and it's hard to say for sure because we have imprecise measurements and we've lost the 40 days during the fall equinox. But here's a bird that we captured on July 1st, the pine bush. This is where it was through the rest of July. Then in August, it was probably hanging around here for the coast. And then again, we have the blackout of the equinox in here, and we have some imprecision. But look at what it looks like this bird is doing. This, to me, we still need to look into this a lot. But this bird looks to me like it's traveling directly to the Caribbean, making a transoceanic flight down to the Caribbean. It arrives down there around November and then hangs out there until April. And then on its way back, it moves back up the coast, up to where we recaptured it on May 23rd.
The 2-week return trip is how many miles per day?
I don't know.
Right then?
I can calculate that. That's not something I have
That's a lot.
offhand. Yeah, they're moving on the way back. That's something I'm interested in for those carryover effects. We're interested in, like, how does habitat have quality in the winter? How does that affect how fast these guys can move back? If they're in really good shape, they might be able to move up the coast faster than birds that aren't in such good shape. So that is something I'm interested in. How fast are they covering that? But that's not something I've looked at yet.
Yeah.
So then just in terms of the summary of these routes, it looks like most of the birds that we've looked at, the 8 we have and some of the ones from Montague, it looks like most of the birds are doing this, down the coast, off the tip of Florida to Cuba, to Haiti and Dominican Republic, and then back. But we have a couple birds that did this seemingly transoceanic flight on the way down, and then they return up along the coast on their way back. So that's all I'm going to show you today. But I would like to mention that this is still very much a work in progress. Most of the results I showed you are only a few weeks old. A lot of these analyses still need to be refined. Some of the analysis, as you mentioned, I haven't even completed yet, so there's things I don't know. So there's still a lot of work to be done with these data, but I think there are still some general conclusions that we can pull from this. And again, I still have to do a lot of thinking about what it is that we found and mull this over more. But I do think that the geolocators are a viable method for studying migrations of prairie warblers, and it's probably really the only way to study it at this point. But clearly these have some limitations. We talked about the low accuracy and precision of some of the positions. So we were hoping, I think, that we were going to find these birds moving down the coast and we could see what spots they were stopping at along the way. Clearly we're not going to quite be able to get it to that level of resolution. But and we also have a loss of positions around the equinox, and that's particularly unfortunate because these things are flying during the fall equinox. So we lose that portion of their fall migration. However, we do have some benefits. We can't tell specific locations, but we can tell general migratory pathways. And if we actually have detected something like this, if these things are making a transoceanic flight, this might be a new piece of information for this species. And then also, just even knowing where their general overwintering locations are, this can still be important. Even having something, do they overwinter in Haiti and Dominican Republic? Just for an example here, here's an aerial view of the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic. This windy river here is the border. What do you notice the difference between Haiti and Republic, or the Dominican Republic? Haiti's largely been deforested. Dominican Republic still has a lot of its native vegetation left. And so the fact that if we knowing our birds end up in Haiti or Dominican Republic can really have really important conservation implications, because what sort of political and cultural and economic environment are these guys landing in each of these different countries can tell us a little bit about what the likelihood of conserving their wintering grounds may be. Okay, well, that's about all I have with the time that I have, and so I'll leave it at that. And so if you guys have any questions, I will be happy to take them.
Do these birds glide at all?
Yeah, but not for long. Not like over the ocean. When you think about albatrosses that just do this, they have to flap like twice a day. They might flap more than that.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
I'm exaggerating. But the prairie warblers, they're not flapping, they're falling.
A lot of energy.
Yeah. But that's why we know some other warblers. We know that the black-poor warbler makes these transoceanic flights. It takes off from the northeast usually. And do they go? Blackpolls go to South America, or do they go to
South America, Brazil?
Yeah. So these guys, we know black-pole warblers make that transoceanic flights. I don't know. This might be new information for the prairie warblers. Dylan started to look into this, and they actually are prairie warblers out in Bermuda. So they've caught them out there. So they're very, very well might likely be making this transoceanic flight. But this is still impressive for like an 8-gram bird to do that.
Do you have any difference in terms of how fast they get down there, whether they're doing the transoceanic or land route?
No, I haven't looked at that yet. I would think that if they're doing transoceanic, they're only going to probably have to do it in 2 days.
Yeah, right.
That's why that data is problematic, because it's like a huge time period, and there's all this slop along how long were they on the coast, and their points here, and then it's hard to get that jump, especially with the fall equinox in there. But none of our other birds were off. Mostly where they're off in terms of latitude, not longitude. And so the fact that the longitude of all those birds are out there suggests that those birds didn't really come over to the coast. And so the data aren't super clean, but it's certainly suggestive of that. And so I think that's something we're going to look into more. But yeah, they're going to be a lot faster flying. I mean, that they do or they're dead.
Yeah.
This is, a very creative way of determining positioning. Do you have some thoughts about another way to determine positioning?
No, not for these birds. There are other ways to track migration. So the only other way, marking's one way to do that. We can put bands on, but this is a really inefficient way to do that, because the chance that we band a bird, the chance that they're going to catch that bird anywhere along the migration is pretty much not going to happen. We've been banding birds here since 2007. Thousands of birds. I think we've only had 5 or 6 ever captured away from the preserve. So you're not going to really be able to track these guys by banding, by any sort of marking. GPS, way too big. The GPS units, which will give you highly precise locations, the technology is, they're just way too large at this point. I'm not sure how small they're able to get, but they're certainly not down to a Prairie Warbler size. The only other one that might show some promise, way to track them, which is still coming on the line, is this Modus Wildlife Tracking System. And so what this is there's an array of radio telemetry towers that they're establishing up along the coast. And so the idea is here you put a radio transmitter on a bird that maybe only lasts like a month, but if it flies down past these antennas, it can go beep, 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 and it'll get picked up as it moves down along. And so then you get more precise locations. I think I think there's still a lot of opportunity for a bird to fly down here and miss all the towers because the network isn't really developed yet. But this Modus tracking system though is growing. And actually, with any luck, we might have if we get the funding, we might put a tower on the roof here to contribute to this network. But the idea is here that once this network starts growing, then yes, I think we can maybe track Prairie Warblers this way, which would give us more precise information. But currently, I think this is what we're looking at with the technology that we have. There's really no other way to get anything so small because they're 8-gram birds. They're like nothing. They're like I think they're like the weight of 4 wheat thins.
4 what?
Wheat thins. I think I was looking at wheat thins. I'm like, oh, 2 grams. That's like 4. That's like the whole Prairie Warbler. Is how much they weigh. And so trying to strap any sort of technology to them is going to be we're going to be hard pressed to do that. And also we need authorization. We can't just strap anchors on these things. The bird banding lab, who gives Neil his permit, has to authorize us to use any of these markings, auxiliary markers.
Steve, will you be looking at any weather data, especially in the fall when there's all sorts of hurricanes and jet stream changes and how that affects?
I mean, we could I don't know if our data are going to be precise enough to say on this day that this is where they're here and they're encountering this storm. I'd be more interested in looking at the weather data. We had that 3-week period when they were on the breeding grounds, when we had all that. If I remember, I think 2016 was no, maybe that's 2016. I don't know. I'd be interested in looking, if those were particularly cloudy, then maybe that's why we're having such a hard time getting a precise fix. So I'd be interested in sort of looking at the weather there to see if that affected our ability to get more precise locations. But yeah, I mean, we could try to tie that, but again, I don't know there was so much slop in there that we basically could say is in this state or this state. It depends on what storm system, but it's possible.
I was just wondering with going right straight over the transatlantic versus, maybe they were a little later and it was clear versus the other ones were going along the coast and there was big storms. I don't know, it's just a thought.
No, I mean, I think it's a good thought. I think it's worth considering. I just don't know if our data are going to be able to say that it was like here in this day when this storm was moving through and unfortunately, the technology, like I said, isn't quite it's not. I don't think we were totally expecting GPS level precision, but I think we were hoping that it was going to be a little more precise than we got. All right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Steve.
My wife has. That's right, after 40 days, I can do whatever I want.
So we're going to move into executive session. I want to give you just some updates on some real property that we're working on. So we need a resolution. A motion, not a resolution. So you got me all messed up. A motion to go into executive session.
Hi.
All right, thanks.